So this is the Moto X4. This is Motorola's latest smartphone, and it looks like a pretty average standard smartphone, right? For the most part it is, but there's a couple of things that makes this phone special. First, it's an Android One device, which means a couple of things. It's very affordable, the experience is basically stock Android, and it'll get timely software updates. Secondly, it's on Google's short list of Project Fi compatible phones, and at $399, it's the most affordable Project Fi phone you can get right now. But what else does it offer? Let's take a look. On the outside, there's nothing overly flashy about the Moto X4, but Android One phones aren't meant to have a ton of bells and whistles. It does still have a pretty nice design, but if you were expecting this to be anything like the Moto X's of yesteryears, you might be a little disappointed. This is really a different phone entirely. Like a lot of phones nowadays, the X4 has a mostly glass design with glass on the front and back and metal wrapping around the sides. It feels really nice and comfortable to hold, especially with the rounded corners, and it's not that big of a phone either, so it's pretty easy to use in one hand. Unlike Motorola's Z series of smartphones, the X4 does come with a headphone jack, so no adapter required here to use your favorite pair of headphones, and it's also IP68 water and dust resistant, which is really nice to see on a phone of this price point. There's nothing fancy about the screen either. It's not curved or bezel-less, it's just your normal smartphone display. It's a 5.2-inch LCD panel with 1080p resolution, and it's not a screen that's going to blow your socks off, but it's honestly fine, and I really had no complaints using it. The colors are nice, it has good viewing angles, and has decent outdoor visibility. The black levels aren't quite as good as an AMOLED screen, but in general, I think most people will be happy with the screen, and I still thought it was a pretty enjoyable experience for watching YouTube or playing games. The biggest perk that you'll find with the Moto X4 is that it has dual cameras on the back, just like Motorola's flagship, the Z2 Force, but unlike the Z2 Force, which has a monochrome sensor, the secondary sensor on the X4 is a wide-angle lens. There's also a camera hump, but it's merely just an aesthetic decision here. There are no Moto mods for this phone. So the main sensor is 12 megapixels at f2.0, and the secondary is a little lower resolution at 8 megapixels with an aperture of f2.2, so it isn't quite as good in low light, but the wide angle is great for landscape shots or group photos. It does have that GoPro-like distortion towards the edges, which I personally don't mind, but I know not everyone is a fan of that look. The secondary sensor also lets you do a depth effect, or portrait mode as it's called on a lot of other phones, and Motorola also lets you do some other neat tricks like crop out the subject and replace it with a different background, or turn parts of the image black and white to put emphasis on a specific part of the photo. The depth effect, however, doesn't really work all that well compared to other phones that I've tried. They're not very convincing, and the blurring bleeds onto the subject most of the time, even ones with pretty simple edges. You can adjust the blur after the fact, but it doesn't really help all that much. General picture quality is decent in good lighting, and you can get some pretty good detail and color, but it crushes the shadows a little too much, and photos fall apart pretty quickly in low light, and they're especially noisy and soft on the wide-angle lens, and it doesn't handle highlights all that well. I'm also not really a fan of the tap to expose that Motorola uses. It's just too finicky, and depending on where you tap, you can get some pretty wild exposure swings. My biggest problem with this camera is that it's just slow. It's slow to capture photos, especially in low light since it doesn't have OIS, and it's also pretty slow to switch between lenses, but hopefully that's something that could be easily fixed with a software update. Speaking of software, it's your typical close to stock Android experience that Motorola offers, which I personally have always enjoyed. There's no bloatware on this phone at all, and you of course get all the Motorola enhancements as well, like the Moto display and various Moto actions like the chop chop to turn on the camera flash and wrist twist to launch the camera. It's running Android Nougat at the moment, but considering this is an Android One device, I assume it'll get updated to Oreo pretty quickly, since that's one of the perks of being an Android One phone. In terms of specs, it's got a Snapdragon 630 processor with 3GB of RAM or 4 depending on your region. It comes with 32GB of internal storage with a micro SD card slot if you need more, and it has a fingerprint reader on the bottom chin that's very fast and accurate, and I like that Motorola lets you use it to put the phone to sleep. It's not the most powerful phone on the market, but I've had no complaints about the performance. It's been very smooth and fluid, whether I'm just using it casually, playing games, or multitasking back and forth between apps, I haven't noticed any stuttering or hiccups. Battery life on the X4 is not amazing, but it's not bad either. It's just average. It has a 3000 milliamp hour battery, and I can get through a full day with pretty normal usage, which includes reading emails, texting, social media, and some light YouTube. But you can kill this phone pretty quickly with more intense use like gaming or a lot of video watching, and screen on time mostly hovered around the 4-hour mark. So overall, I think the Moto X4 is a pretty solid smartphone, but if you buy it with the expectation of it being anything like previous Moto X's, you'll be sorely disappointed. The only thing this really shares in common with Moto X's of the past is the name. Otherwise, it's a completely different phone. Again, what makes this phone great is the fact that it's part of the Android One program, but it's also Project Fi compatible at the same time, and at an affordable price of $400, it's the perfect gateway phone if you're looking to get into Project Fi for the first time without spending a lot of money. But even if you're not looking for all of that, it's just a good budget phone in general, something that Motorola continues to excel at time and time again. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this review of the Moto X4. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And of course, check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google+, all that good stuff will be linked down below. And check out the website as well, androidauthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.